Welcome to the Foundation Series, your deep dive into startup compensation with industry leaders from across the startup world. Join me, Matt McFarlane, a people operations leader turned compensation specialist, as we uncover the strategies and practices driving success in tech startups around the world. Hear insights from heads of people, founders, and experts as we explore how to build robust compensation frameworks that not only fuel growth and retention, but do so in the dynamic startup environment that we all know and love. Let's get into it. All right, well, Shelley, formally, welcome to the Foundation Series. Super stoked to have you here. How are you? It's Monday. How was your weekend?
You know what? It's so funny. Anytime someone asks me how my weekend was, I'm like, what did I do? Do you have that?
Exact same problem. I don't know what happens between Sunday night and Monday where my memory just gets completely wiped. Yeah, it's a true thing. It's a genuine thing. It's like we're different people. You know what? What's that movie? The TV show, the Apple one? Severance. I go in the elevator and then suddenly I'm a different person, even though I'm sure everyone who listens to this podcast knows that I work from home. So I don't know if it's the doorway or what. Anyway, you remember now?
The doorway to walk into your office and you're like, and my brain is wiped.
Yeah. I feel really bad for poor Friday afternoon, Matt, who's just like, oh man, it's been a week. And then, it's Monday morning.
I feel you. I feel like we're on the same wavelength. But how was your weekend? Do you remember it?
You know what? I do, because I actually gave myself a long weekend. Perks of working for yourself. I mean, anyone can do it, but I don't have to ask for permission, which is lovely. I went whale watching on Friday. It was so good. I live in like North Coast, New South Wales, and it's the end of the season here. I don't know if you see them where you are in Newcastle, but yeah, they come in really close. And so we went on a little whale tour and it was amazing. Got to see, jumping out of the water saying good day. We saw dolphins. We saw a hammerhead shark. I didn't realize we had those here. Yeah, super cool. So it was awesome. And then, to be honest, I don't remember what I did the rest of the weekend. It was pretty chill, but memorable Friday at the very least. Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, that's amazing. No, I just hung with the kids. I'm pretty sure that's all I did. Went for a beach walk. We're both in coastal towns, so that is a beautiful thing that you can go for a beach walk most weekends.
Well, good to hear that we didn't totally have our memories erased by the Monday mornings. Now, I'm pretty sure that my Australian audience are going to be very familiar with who you are. But for those who are outside the country, tell me a little bit about you and your background, your story. How did you get here? And then let's talk about other stuff.
Yeah, well, I'm Shelley, and how did I get here? I mean, when people put X, whatever company they work in, on their LinkedIn profile or whatever, and they're like X Canva or X some cool organization, sometimes I think about putting like X HR. But then I'm like, I will never not be a HR person. That's how I feel deep in my soul. So like I've worked in HR roles from starting in an admin role right through to being a head of HR. Was my last role before then starting my own business, and I run a leadership consulting business called Boldside. And I don't know, for me, one of the things that I love, like there's like two reasons I love people and culture. And the first one is like I love seeing organizations thrive and do their best work and have a big impact. And the way that you do that is through people. But then there's like the secret reason. And the secret reason, which I'm just going to tell your beautiful people who listen to this podcast, the secret reason is that I love all the weird stuff about people. And if anyone who works in HR knows, people are weird. Like they're just so weird. And we come to work with all our beautiful quirkiness that we bring, and it becomes this melting pot of like drama and issues and problems. And for me, one thing that I love is like, in my first ever, like really, like probably the best HR team I worked in. And if they listen to this pod, they will know exactly who they are because it was a really good team. We had this People Are Weird like book that we wanted to write of just like all the HR stories.
The library.
Yeah, and we would collect these stories. And so for me, I say ex-HR because I'm not in the day-to-day of HR anymore. But it is always like such a deep feeling of, I love the role, I love the value that it adds, I love the people in it because they understand, they get it. And so, yeah, that's that is like the reason I love it, and also my secret reason for loving working in a HR space.
Yeah, I love it. I totally agree. I think I used to say it all the time. I have the ex-HR badge as well. And I used to say that people were the best and the worst part of the job. And it's like, you think about people are weird. It could not be more perfect. And yeah, maybe we're going to have to think about publishing a redacted version of that book eventually. Imagine if we made a global one. That'd just be
Yeah,
people's
and
submissions.
any relevance to real life people is purely coincidental. And
Oh, absolutely. Real or imagined. Yeah, we can put all the disclaimers in there. Um, so good. And so why leadership? What led you down the path you've taken with Boldside?
I think the big thing for me was seeing that most HR or people and culture issues, before they come to the people and culture team, they are almost always a leadership issue. And it could be a range of things, like a manager not feeling confident to have a tough conversation, a leader who maybe wasn't aware of the impact that they were having on their team. And so issues would bubble away and they would escalate or they would get worse. And over time, certain things would be tolerated or allowed on teams that maybe weren't helpful or weren't serving the culture that the organisation was trying to create. And they would end up coming through as like a complaint or a grievance or some kind of issue where I was like, oh, if we can solve the upstream issue of leadership capability, we can actually change and transform this organisation. If we can equip leaders to be able to deal with challenges early, but also to be able to set their teams up to thrive, to do their best work, to be well, to be healthy, all of those things, what an impact we can have. But I guess for me, the challenge I'd seen having worked in people and culture was there's never enough hours in the day to do that because you're stuck in all the reactive day-to-day work, and it can feel really emotionally taxing, the role. It can feel really draining. You're in back-to-back meetings non-stop. Like I was talking with a head of people this morning before coming to this pod, and she's like, I woke up this morning, I only had 2 meetings in my calendar. And I was like, yes, I'm going to get to the strategy stuff today that has been on my list for ages. And she's like, by the time I got into the office at 9:15, it was completely back-to-back booked. And I think about that being just such a regular thing for so many people in our industry. And so I'd love to help people and culture teams get out of the reactive and into the strategic. And I think the way to do it is by developing great leaders.
Love it. I love it as a mission. Love it as a North Star. I mean, I'm as you're speaking, I'm like thinking of all of the examples in my own career of like different leaders I've had and where like, maybe poor leadership has led to the outcomes that I've had in those sorts of companies where I've had great leaders. How much do you think? Well, no, actually, let me say, like, I often reflect on the bad leaders as like being lessons as well. Do you sort of spend a lot of time in the work that you do, like helping reflect on, people who have maybe been poor leaders themselves, and like help them use that as an exercise to their own development?
Yeah, well, we do both. So we ask people to think about the best person you've ever worked for, the best leader you've ever worked for, and try to distill what are all the little subtle things they did that made them great. Because usually it's not in the big things. Like people always think mad about it's the big sexy stuff where they get up and they do this really great speech to all staff or whatever. But it's like, no, it's actually the little things. What are the tiny little things that manager did that made you really love working for them? And then let's flip it. So invert that thinking and go, okay, think about the worst leader you've ever worked for, or maybe not even the worst, maybe like someone who you just thought was like mediocre. Because sometimes that can be even helpful to kind of distill that down. What are the little things that they did that undermined their success? So if you can distill down, what are the small things that undermined their effectiveness as a leader and how do I avoid them? And then how do I actually do more of those little disciplines or habits or behaviors that successful leader did? I think we can chunk down this huge thing of leadership. And when we think about leadership, we're like, it's so like big. The whole concept is so big, it's so broad, but let's like think about the littlest, smallest steps and then putting some things into action based on that.
Yeah, it can be really intimidating, can't it? Like you said, you sort of think of leadership as this huge thing where it's like, yeah, you have to. I mean, I often think of like the charismatic leader. So, like you said, sort of being up in front and like leading the charge, those sorts of things. What are some approaches that you can take to try and help people see it as being more approachable and then like start to just take some formative steps?
Yeah, there's a few things. I mean, I think the key things people need to begin with is like, how do you become more consistent? And so if we think about what consistency looks like for a leader, it's prioritizing one-on-one check-ins. Like, and that might be 15-minute. It doesn't have to be this formal thing all the time, especially if you're in a startup. Like I am in a startup myself, having come from corporate where everything was super structured to the chaos of startup. And if you were to say to all of your managers in a business that's scaling up really quick, you now need to have a weekly 30-minute check-in with every single direct report, they'd probably have a complete meltdown because they're like, when am I going to find time for that? What we tend to say is you just need to find intentional one-on-one time based on what that person needs. So if it's me and you're reporting to me, Matt, I know you're pretty autonomous. You you work in a way you've got a lot of freedom. So it might be a 15-minute phone call when you're out for a walk on the beach and I'm out for my walk and we just check in, how's things going? Whereas if you've got a new team member who actually doesn't know the industry, who doesn't know the role, who's not very autonomous, you may need a 30-minute weekly check-in. But you do that based on the person, what they need. The key thing is I know my people. I intentionally have one-on-one connection with those people and I make it work based on them, the role, and what the organization needs. It doesn't have to be fixed or rigid, but certainly like consistency in making that a priority to me is really important. And just one other thing, I mean, there's heaps under consistency we could talk about, but just this one other thing that I reckon is massive is building your self-awareness. And the only way you build your self-awareness is you have to create margin to self-reflect. And how do we build that in as a practice or a habit? And I think to me, it's less about building the skill and it's more about I have a habit of self-reflecting. Every week I kind of think about, okay, where did I do my best work? Where did I find my energy was low? And if you can help your leaders to do that, it can be really helpful.
I love that topic, and I'm keen to dive in a little bit deeper on that because I've always been really curious about this whole concept of like how do we evaluate leaders internally and like how do we know when our leaders are doing great? They're such a pivotal role and they have such a huge impact. I mean, there's not, we've got those sayings, people don't leave companies, they leave leaders for a reason. I don't think it's the only reason, but what are some great ways that companies can try to introduce these sorts of mechanisms without it? Like, I mean, we mentioned before, it's intimidating, right? Like, and I, again, self-reflection, I've definitely been in that mindset before where as a leader, I didn't think it was safe for me to ever sort of talk about or ask about areas for me to be better. Because I think like there's often this, and certainly again, my experience is that it's like when you're a leader, you have to be sort of confident and, you know what you're doing and seem to have all the answers and all those sorts of things. How do you try to break that down and create the space for people to actually like seek feedback and yeah, just get better?
I've got ideas, but before I do, can I just follow up? What was it about that environment that made you feel like you weren't safe to say, these are the areas I'm struggling with, or this is the thing I want to develop in?
I think it's like, probably a couple of things. Like I've definitely had leaders where that I think was the impression that I got from that experience. Like they weren't good at role modeling that kind of vulnerability. And then I think just generally like I think the baggage that you collect along your career as well. Like, there's always everyone come from that employee left and they're just like, oh my God, like I really question my abilities here. And so I think some of those things can definitely impact. And it took really intentional, like great leadership to try and undo some of that where I was actually a lot more comfortable. And I've got a million stories that I can share around like, for example, stifling or feeling like I was stifling junior employees because I didn't want to be seen to be, have someone who was as competent as me. Those sorts of things are definitely like challenges that I've grappled with as well. But it's like, how do you undo that when, like, especially new employees, like everyone comes with their own baggage? Because I think there's your culture and then there's the baggage that people come from other cultures as well. How do you start to just, create this space for that, do you think?
Yeah, it is a really good question. I think the first step is you have to, it goes back to what you said up front, like, what does a good leader look like? And so people need to know first and foremost what makes a great leader. And if we don't know that, we can't actually become it. It's like, it'd be like, hey, go and present to this group and do a really great job of public speaking. Well, if you've never listened to anyone public speak well, how do you know what good looks like? Like, if you've never actually experienced that, you don't have a reference point for what great looks like. And in the same way, it's really interesting. My friend is a teacher in a local primary school, and she says they do this thing when they're doing their kind of reflection as professional development for teachers. It's called WAGOLL. Have you ever heard of it?
Never heard of it.
So WAGOLL, she was like, oh, I got WAGOLLed today. And I was like, what is that? Like, explain yourself. Like, WAGOLLed. So it's W-A, I'm writing it down because it's helping me think. WAGOLL, WAGOLL. And then they're like, they go WAGOLLed if this happened to you. Gotcha. And it stands for what a good one looks like. And what they do when they're teaching kids is, if you see something, let's say you're having to write a short story, a creative story, they'll put up what a good one looks like. And then I'm like, okay, I have a reference point, what good looks like. And then they'll put up one that's like what a bad one looks like. Now, there's no, like, it's not about shaming anyone, but they just give kids these examples of like, anyway, so then when they do their teacher professional development, if a teacher's done an amazing job and got a particular outcome with a class, they'll actually put that, here's what Sophie, this amazing teacher who's one of my really good friends, did. And this is what a good one looks like when you're a teacher. Like, this is what it looks like. She's done X, Y, Z. This is the outcomes this is what it meant for her students. And let's all test this out in our next lesson or next class. And I think the simplicity of that, and I sometimes come back to like learning for kids. There's so much simplicity in the way that they do things. And so I kind of feel like in leadership, we need those two versions. What does a good one look like? And how do we aim for that? But if we're not getting taught what great leadership looks like, then we learn by osmosis. And unfortunately, for many people, and I know your listeners will relate, they're listening right now and they're like, I've got so many wobbled, what a bad one looks like. Like, I've got so many of those examples, but I don't often see great leaders. And so then who do we have to learn from? And this is where education and learning and development become super crucial. And it doesn't need to be formal classroom style, although there is that. It could be on-the-job learning. You get people together and you define, okay, what are the must-have behaviours for great leaders at this organisation? And you might come up with 3. You might come up with 5. Whatever those behaviours are, you say, this is what great leadership looks like here. And then, going back to your original question, how do we all self-reflect on which of those qualities am I doing well? Which do I struggle with? So for us at Boldside, we would say courage is an essential leadership trait. Like, if you're going to lead, you have to be courageous. You have to have tough conversations. You have to make hard calls. So if I was looking at that and I'm like, well, how do I show up in that way? Am I willing to hold people accountable? Am I going to give feedback when feedback's needed? And I would self-assess and go, okay, cool, that might be the area for me that I have to upskill in. We need to do that within our organisations, and you don't need a formal massive learning program. You just need to define what good looks like for you and then give them a process to self-reflect on it.
Love it. I was going to go down this path of like, what does a lightweight approach look like? I think you've done an amazing job kicking us off. Where do companies go then from there? Like, if they've got these kind of like North Star behaviors, they've got this great idea of like what, the kind of leadership behaviors they're looking for are. You mentioned before there's like a kind of, a one-on-one model or a framework that you touched on as well. What are the other kind of key things that come to mind when you think about like, what's something that could just get you started, that could just help start to embed some of these behaviors and, would already be leaps and bounds ahead of either most organizations or having nothing, or what does that look like for you?
Okay. So if we step it out, like step 1, you've got to define what good looks like. So we've established that. And let's say you come up with 3 behaviors or skills we need to see with our leaders. It might be courage, it might be consistency, and it might be care. So like high care factor for people and for the organization. We have courageous conversations. And I can't remember the other one because I was making it up on the fly. But consistency.
Consistency.
So let's say there are 3. We've defined them. Then everyone's self-assessed. So they're like, okay, I'm really good at having the tough conversations and I care a lot about people, but my moods and behavior is pretty inconsistent. Okay, cool. Well, now we need to know that you've got to work on that. But that might be different to the manager sitting across from you. They might need to work on their courageous conversation skill set. So we tailor it to the people we have. And then we say, okay, cool. Instead of like, if budgets are tight and you're resource constrained, one thing that heads of people and HR team members can do, they can curate content. So podcasts like this, there's a whole stack of things out there like short form, bite-sized content and say, okay, we're all going to read this particular book. We're all going to listen to this particular podcast this month or this week. And then we're going to get together as a bunch of managers and we're going to unpack what do we learn and what action are we taking? And it's just like create a community, like a small coaching community, and just start the conversation, because really what we're trying to get people to do is to firstly get an insight. So what is their aha moment? And then secondly, take action. So insight and aha moment, and then that translates into, okay, well, what action are you taking? If you just did that, you spent, an hour once a month with those group of managers, you are in the business of leadership development. Doesn't have to be a full day off-site. Doesn't have to be a retreat somewhere. It could just be as simple as a monthly 1 hour conversation where we get practical about whatever our insights and what are our actions.
Love it. Simple. Like you said, it's so easy to like overcomplicate what we think leadership should be when actually to get started, it can really just be these simple steps, can't it?
Oh, and especially if you've come from big corporate. Like I was in a session the other day and I just had this sense it was a really large corporate, and they were talking about all these models and frameworks and like distilling down this really, really complicated capability framework. And I was like, holy moly, like, can we just simplify this right down? Because if we put ourselves in the position of a people manager, they are usually pretty stressed. They feel constantly overworked. They have a whole stack of really complex people issues they don't know how to manage. And we throw this really overbaked, complicated capability framework on top of them to be like, now you've got to do this. And it's like, tiered into 5 different like levels and all these proficiencies. And we throw all these words out. And I'm like, just make it make sense. Like, what are 3 things I need to focus on? And what's one action?
It's like they're getting it from both ends, and then top down, bottoms up, and then to have these like crazy complicated frameworks that presumably may impact things like how they're paid or whatever. But it just all starts to become a little bit too much, doesn't it?
Yeah, and especially when it does link back to your space of like remuneration, it increases the stakes for a lot of people. And it's like if we keep things as simple as we can. Now, not like we recognize workplaces are complex beings or entities. They're not really they're not sentient beings. Sentient. Do you know that word?
I've heard of it.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm rambling on about something that really adds no value. But all that to say, I don't think we need to overbake it.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think it's also, it touches on something else that I've been thinking a lot about recently, which is like, how do we make leadership roles appealing to people as well? Like, I think I'm seeing a lot lately about the real lack of interest from, up and coming generations in taking on that responsibility, because it is. I think when you see things like these huge capability frameworks, or you see, in the tech space, in my space, where I'm seeing a lot of, the middle level layers of leaders be evaporated from even big tech companies. I think some people will either think there's no future in it, or they think there's, that it's overly complicated and maybe it doesn't pay as well as it could be for the level of responsibility you can take on. How do you think about that for companies, and how can they kind of really boil down the benefit of it for people and make it appealing again?
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because it's really swung. Whereas like when, I'm not going to assume what your demographic is age-wise, but for me, when I was like in the early part of my career, so like 15 years ago, the goal was to get into management. Climb the career ladder, become a manager, then pathway to exec. That was the goal for most people, or certainly the rhetoric that was encouraged within organisations. Whereas you're absolutely right, now we're seeing a lot of that stuff around Gen Z not wanting to progress into leadership roles. And I think there's a few reasons for it. And I mean, I'll just hypothesize on it because I'm not like a researcher or any of that. But I think one reason people don't want to get into leadership roles is because leaders are often the first one to be blamed when things go wrong. So, and sometimes there's a reason for that, right? Like if a team does, so let's take a sporting team. If a sporting team doesn't go well, people don't necessarily look to the players, they look to the coach. And the coach is the first person on the chopping block. And in the same way, like if you lead a team and your team's not succeeding, well, people are going to look to you. And that makes sense in like a range of ways. The way that it doesn't make sense is that we just plonk people into leadership and we say, you did the job, now you can lead the team. And it's the only strategy, not the only strategy, but one very prevailing strategy for leadership development that I've seen over my career is sink or swim. You're an engineer? Great. Now you will be the manager of the engineers. Well, not great, because leadership, like anything, is a skill and people need a chance to develop. And so I think that's one reason. If you're looking at your leader and you're going, okay, they didn't get the support they needed, they didn't get trained, they didn't get developed, there was no clear what a good one looks like. So they're like fumbling around trying to figure it out on the job with 5 to 8 people. Of course they're going to be struggling, and people are like, I don't want to do that. Like if I'm going to be blamed for this team not performing well, but I'm not equipped to actually do the job well, why would I sign up to that? And so therein lies like for us, like the big thing is, well, how do we stop the sink or swim strategy and we actually onboard leaders properly so that they're developed, so they're set up for success and they can thrive in the role?
Yeah, it's not a great employer brand for anyone else in the organization either when they see someone who's maybe newly installed as a leader and just see them totally unsupported, fumble, like not sure how to do their jobs effectively, those sorts of things. Not to mention there's probably a lot of resentment around like, well, I don't know, like did they even want this job? Did they just do it for the money as well? Were they just rewarded for being a great individual contributor? Like what's the actual criteria around how that person became a leader effective as well? Like there's a lot of baggage there. There's a lot of brand issue there, I think, as well internally, if you're trying to bring people into those sorts of roles. So like, I guess flipping the script a little bit then, how do we start to create the criteria around supporting these sorts of people? Either, I don't know, do you think like it's one of those things where it's like before they're ready to step into a role? Is it a thing of just like being super supportive when they step into a role? What does that kind of pathway into leadership for a first timer look like?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. So I think if someone identifies, there's obligations on both parties here, right? There's the organizational imperative that organizations should have a process for developing leaders. It doesn't have to be super formal, but it should be, this is our process for developing leaders here. And in the same way, employees who want to get into leadership roles should have like their own mechanisms for, well, if the organization isn't prioritizing this for whatever reason, I am going to do my own learning. I'm going to listen to the pods we mentioned. I'm going to read a stack of books. I'm going to actually take some action here. So I do think the imperative is on both parties to take the right steps. The big thing though, I think when it comes to how we actually shift this like sink or swim strategy, and we've probably talked about this before offline, I don't know, but I always rant on about this. So it's just people probably roll their eyes if they've heard me say this. In the same way that we have an onboarding process for new starters, we 1000% need an onboarding process for leaders. So you imagine the amount of effort that goes into our new starter onboarding. Like the first 6 months, this is what it looks like as a new starter. And we've worked really hard on that. And I think people and culture teams have driven that from the front, saying we need to do this. This is how we set our team members up for success. We also need a leadership onboarding process. And I would say the first 6 months, this is what it looks like for you as a new leader here, whether you've led people or not, because leadership at a mining company will look very different to leadership at an e-commerce startup. So what does it look like here? And then over the first 6 months, these are going to be the touch points. We're going to talk about how you have one-on-one conversations. We're going to talk about how you evaluate performance, how you have conversations about pay and benefits, all the things. And it's staged out in bite-sized pieces that make sense. And if we could do that for our managers, oh my gosh, we could set them up for so much success. And not just them, it's the team impact. That is where it's felt so heavily. So that would be my biggest recommendation to anyone, is come up with a leadership onboarding process.
And is it a case of like similar to these kind of leadership behaviors, you think, where it's like, let's sit down and think of like, what are the skills, or what, what's the criteria for success for us as a company? Like, how do you think this metaphorical team could best assemble this new onboarding process?
Yeah, so I think there'll be a few things. It'll be, here are the key behaviors for leaders. Let's go back to what we said. So it's care, courage, and consistency. These are the behaviors we want you to live out. Now, under each one, here are the expectations. When it comes to consistency, here in this business, we meet at least monthly one-on-one, but we recommend fortnightly. In this business, we review pay every 6 months, and that means that you need to be evaluating their performance and having conversations regularly, because in 6 months' time, when you have a discussion about their remuneration and benefits, you need to say, hey, these things were hit and you achieved it and well done, and this is what that means, or no, you haven't delivered, and so there's no surprises. So you would have like your behaviors or skills that people need to build, but then it's like, what are the actions or habits that the leader at that particular organization will represent or uphold?
Yeah, I love that. It made me reflect. I think it was the most recent company I worked at, where we actually went to the extent of really quantifying what these things actually look like in reality. And the basis for that, and I'm curious for your take on this, is like, so many companies that I've worked in, leadership or management can often just become this bolt-on to just being a worker and to doing the work.
Yes.
And so one of the things we really wanted to try and avoid was going, well, you're a leader now, congratulations. You're doing everything you were doing before, plus all of this, like the leadership, threshold and the responsibility that comes with that, which we knew was going to be a recipe for disaster, but all sorts of things, not to mention leadership just being done poorly. But I guess what are your tips? What are your thoughts around like preventing management just becoming this kind of layer on top of you as an individual contributor, and actually intentionally creating the space for it to be done well, and not just being this kind of dual wielding issue?
Well, I reckon this is I think you've picked up on such a massive challenge, because people then start quantifying, I'm 60% on the tools, 40% management. But what happens when you have a major people problem and all of a sudden 100% of your focus is dealing with performance management or dealing with like a really challenging dynamic? Maybe one of your team members has had something really terrible happen and all of your attention and energy goes into that thing. It's not, to me, a hard and fast, like, this is the percentage on people, this is the percentage on process and performance outputs and all that. I think that there's a couple of things. One thing is about how we message it to people as well. Like, and I know this sounds trivial, but we often at Boldside talk about how people management is not an add-on. It's not an add-on to your role. It is the role. If you're in a leadership position, you are there to help lead, manage, guide that team. That is the role. Now, where it gets tricky is, and I think this is partly what we're seeing in tech, large tech companies who are eliminating managers that have one direct report. Where it gets tricky is if I am an individual contributor and I'm killing it, I'm doing really well. And they're like, oh, we need to get let's say I'm a graphic designer. We need to get a new graphic designer in. You're great. We're just going to add a direct report to you. And so then you really are like, well, it's just one person. What am I? So the identity is not clear. And so that's where I feel like organizations are now looking at it going, what is the right ratio of manager to direct reports? Because if you're if you've got a whole stack of managers who only have one team member, well, of course they're going to be on the tools. And that ambiguity in their role means like they're often going to prioritize getting the work done themselves naturally because that's what's got
Well, it's a comfort thing, right, as well.
Yes.
That's what they're familiar with.
Yes. So I don't know. I guess I recognize the grey in this. Like my general sense is management's not an add-on to your role. It's core to your role. But then when you have those like anomaly cases where you've got one direct report, that can be a really challenging message because you're like, well, I still have to deliver all of my work that I was previously doing in 5 days, plus I've now got this one person to manage.
Yeah, this is the grey I really live in with startups because I think so often, like, especially trying to introduce something like a job level framework where it's like, you know, manager 1, manager 2, manager 3, where a manager 1 might be more of a kind of lead where it's like, you know, I'm there to help sort of be of support to, you know, to my direct reports on the quality of their work and things like that. But maybe I'm not necessarily making hiring and performance types of decisions, but it can be really challenging. Yeah, just like, you know, how do you quantify the sort of minimum and maximum, or should you even be doing that? You know, the ratios of how few or how many direct reports you should have and like what that means for you on a day-to-day basis.
And I mean, there's a lot of research around the maximum span of control, right? Like that on average, if you get over, if you're a manager and you have more than 8 direct reports, 8 people you manage, you're getting to the research will say you're getting to the upper limit of what you can really add value, like really add value and contribute and create a humming team. But there's not really I haven't seen a lot of content or ideas put forward around, well, is it worth having a team with only like a manager who has one direct report? And I would probably argue the ideal scenario is if you've got people managers, they should have between 5 to 8 direct reports on average, or 4 to 8, somewhere in that ballpark, because it means that they can actually invest in their management, not have the split focus of like, I'm on the tools plus I'm trying to do this other thing, and they feel like they're competing. But again, this is all preference. There's nothing to back it up. It's just more my personal preference.
Yeah, and it's like, do you give that person one direct report, or do you lift them up a level and make their manager have 9 direct reports now, and suddenly it's like you're between a rock and a hard place, right? So it's let's acknowledge the murkiness of most companies.
Yes.
Yeah,
especially
in an ideal world.
Startups, especially in startups, because it's like it's all happening so fast.
Yeah,
like it's just like
100%.
It's such a challenge.
Speaking of which, an area that I really want to dive into, and I think like we sort of touched on this as a bit of a skill build when it comes to leaders, is like having these difficult conversations, and I think none more so than the topic that I deal with on a daily basis, which is pay. One of the reasons I love it is that it's so analytical, but it's also very emotive and emotional and all these sorts of things. Any tips or any kind of like thoughts around how to help leaders tackle what can be, and it doesn't even have to be pay as a topic, but just like, I find pay tends to be one of those things where it's like, it's one of those conversations that I like to think of as like a boil over topic. It's one of those things where it's like people kind of quietly bide the issues, and they mount and mount and mount. And suddenly they're like, I can't take this anymore and I need to talk about it. But by that point, they're angry, they're upset, they're whatever. Whereas for the manager, depending on the relationship they have with them, this could be the first time they're hearing about it, and they get sort of confronted by their employee with like, the cost of living and how to pay increase, and how do I, you haven't talked to me about, how to get a promotion, and all these sorts of things suddenly catch up and happen in this one conversation. How do you think leaders or, teams can be equipping leaders to have these sorts of conversations?
Yeah, I would see pay as like one of those volcano topics where it just lies dormant for ages and it's just bubbling. And unless a leader's kind of proactively and preemptively engaging in conversations around that, it tends to only come up in a way that you think, oh my gosh, what's been going on? Like, why haven't we had conversations about this earlier? Exactly to your point. And so it can lie dormant and then feel like when it is raised, it can feel a little bit heated. And when I say heated, I more mean like feels like it's come out of left field. And so couple of things we would recommend. I might do this from both sides of the coin. So let's think about what a manager can do when it comes to pay and creating really transparent, healthy conversations around it. And then let's think about what the employee can do or the team member can do. So if you're a manager, any spicy topic of conversation, pay is going to be one, promotions is going to be another, anything like around that could be have those emotional responses to, you just preempt them. Preempt that we're going to need to have conversations. And so you would say to your team, hey, I just want to let you know, here's the way we do pay here. Every 6 months, we're going to have a conversation. We're going to review how you've been performing, how's the business been performing, because that matters for pay rises. And we're going to be talking about what that means for you and your remuneration. And so at this point in the year, this is when that happens. So you're not left waiting, because I think in small organizations, if I don't know when that's happening, I just think they don't care, they're not aware, all of those things. And it's like, just preempt it. So preempt the pay conversation if you're in a manager role, in the same way that you might say, hey, we're going to have every quarter, we're going to chat about your career development. And we're going to have an actual conversation, not about your day-to-day work. What do you want to do in your career? What are your goals and how can I help you? And if I am strategic in scheduling that in over the year calendar, oh my gosh, I'm front loading so much of the work and I'm minimizing the explosion of, oh my gosh, my manager has completely forgotten about me. They don't care, this, that, and the other. So preempt it if you're in a management role and then schedule it in advance. I feel like
Oh no, I think as you're saying it, I'm like, yes, because it just really lowers the barrier to entry to even have that conversation, because it's like, oh, we've talked about pay before. Like we've talked about it, even if it was 6 months ago. So it's not this kind of novel thing. And especially when you've come into an organization where you may have had a very different relationship with pay and your manager and that sort of dynamic previously, it just means that it's we've talked about it. It's not this big thing. It's not a taboo issue. So maybe if they've mentioned to me before how pay works, I can just say, hey, this stuff's on my mind. How do we navigate it before it turns into this volcano explosion thing?
Well, and then it's so helpful, because it actually means that it doesn't mean you're promising a pay increase.
Yeah.
Unless it's an award minimum requirement, please, people.
Yeah,
but
please do that, though.
Please do that. Yeah, because that's absolutely a legal requirement. But let's say they're above award and you're like, it doesn't mean you're making any promises, but what you are promising is we will have a conversation and these are the things that we'll be talking about, how you've gone, your cultural contribution, this, and you just, the less ambiguity around a conversation that feels contentious, the better that conversation will go. So take the feeling of this is an elephant in the room out of it and go, okay, this is how we do things here.
Yeah. One thing that it made me reflect on in my own career is and I only did this toward the end of it, is that it's as a HR person, we deal with so much, you see everything, right? And so, I've been that HR person. I'm sure many people listening to this, I'm sure you, Shelley, have been this HR person where you're going through the pay review cycle and you have to obviously extricate yourself from it, but you're still someone who gets paid and likes money and needs money and, wants to know what the impact of these sorts of things is on yourself as well. And I remember last couple of companies I worked for my team, I was just hey, I just want to set the tone from the beginning, is that we're going into compensation review time. Obviously, this is going to affect your pay as well. You're going to see stuff that happens that, may be very different to, and I can't remember specifically what I said, but it was you may see stuff that pops up that you're like, oh, I don't know if I agree with that or something like that, or I have an opinion or whatever. Please raise it with me. Let's have a conversation about it. I want to just, again, make it clear that I know that these awkward moments happen with yourself and your pay, and I can reflect on a million of them, including a former boss who told me what my pay was by opening up my pay review outcome, by opening up the letter on her screen, on her computer in front of me, and then just sort of swung around the chair and was like, oh, that's your pay increase. And I was just so caught off guard by it, because it wasn't even a pay outcome. It wasn't even what the conversation was about. And I was just anyway, so I've had a million of those.
It's a grand reveal. And yes. This is something I've prepared earlier.
Oh my God. There's so many reflections, so many learnings, but I think I just went into it just going I know weird shit happens when it comes to pay and it comes to how we ourselves as HR people experience that. But it's like, you're a human. You obviously, have your own hopes, dreams, and desires around pay as well. So like, let's make sure we're talking about it throughout this process. And yeah, it just made it a much simpler thing. And they were kind of like, oh, cool. Like, thanks. It's less of a huge thing for me to have to carry through the process.
Yeah, it takes some of the fear out of it too. And if you're able, I love how you said to your team, hey, like this, like you'll have some awkward stuff come up, just raise it. Because by preempting that, you're saying this is safe. It's safe to have a discussion around this. I'm not going to be surprised. What will surprise me if you hold on to it for 12 months and don't tell me. Let's have the conversations as we need. I think going back to what can an employee do. So we know what a leader can do. They can preempt. They can get organized and plan out in like moments throughout the year to have these conversations around pay. If you're an employee and you think, oh, this is not the case in my organisation, we're not having conversations regularly, one thing you might be able to say, especially if you've come from an organisation that's done it well, is you could say, hey, at my last organisation, we had like these timelines for performance, remuneration, and career development reviews. Is that something that we do here? And if so, I'd love to be able to plan and prepare for those types of conversations. Is that something we would be able to do, or do you already have that kind of mapped out? Because often a manager has this stuff in their mind, they just haven't communicated it. And if you can raise the question in a way that feels like, hey, this has been my experience in the past, what do you reckon? And also say, I'd love to be able to prepare for that in a way that is helpful to you as a manager. It can be such a nice conversation versus the like awkwardness of waiting.
I need a pay increase.
Yeah. Yeah. Or just hoping that they're gonna bring it up, and they're not mind readers. Like they don't know.
Perfect. It's one of those. What was I going to say? It's like, I think so often you can feel really on the spot as a leader, and probably as an employee as well, because it's like, again, you've probably been thinking about this thing for days and days and days. And I know if it was me, like I would overthink it, and then I'd say the thing that I thought I was going to say, and then I totally fumble it, and then I get upset at myself, and now I'm just like a hot mess, and so. Yeah, there's all these like things that get in the way, but it's like by being upfront and saying, hey, here's kind of where I'm at, even if it's a part of the career conversation, here's the kind of vision that I have for myself and where I want to be at. Let's talk about the steps to get there from today, rather than me being at a point where I'm deeply ready for it and feel like I'm deserving of it, but the business hasn't been along the journey with me, and the manager's maybe feeling a little bit blindsided.
Yes, and I think that's a really good call out there around giving people the time horizon you're working towards and giving that early. So if you're like, in the next 2 years, I'd love to be here when it comes to my role and my remuneration and whatever in my skill level, do you reckon we could have a conversation about what that could look like here? And then you're not, I think you're absolutely right. You're not just hitting them with it when you're like desperately needing it to move up or whatever.
Amazing. What a toolkit. The last thing that I was so deeply keen to chat with you about in this session was like, there's leadership, and then there's, I think, like leadership as a head of people, as a HR professional, HR leader. And I'm always really curious about this topic, because I think it's something that I've certainly grappled with in my career. I think it is a general sort of thing, is that it's like we deal with such a broad remit, and I now have got, myself, I've gone from this sort of people operations generalist remit to now I focus on comp. And even then I don't always feel necessarily like confident and influential sometimes around this very, very important topic. But it's this general sense of like, how do we build confidence and influence as a people leader? And it doesn't even have to be HR people in general. I just know that it's felt there at that level. But where do you think we should start as leaders ourselves when it comes to building our own confidence and influence as a skill, for us as professionals?
Oh my goodness, this is like, we could do a whole
Shouldn't have left it till the end.
We could do a whole part 2 on this, Matt, and maybe we should when you're in person.
All
You're
right.
going to come up to the studio and we're going to do one in person. So this could be
100%.
good. Okay, a couple of things. What I know about people and culture, HR people. I meet so many highly credible HR experts, super credible. I often feel like their credibility level doesn't match their confidence. And that gap, we need to close that, because I know the people listening to this podcast, take their career really seriously. They're very deeply invested. They care. They show up. They do so much in the interest of the organization. And maybe they feel like I'm very credible, but my confidence doesn't match the credibility level. So here's, I guess, a bit of a like very quick framework we use to help HR experts build their influence, because I think this is a gap. And this has certainly been something I've struggled with for a long time and had to work really hard to build what I would say is my influence in HR versus my credibility. There's 3 questions I want you to answer. And the first one is people. So who do you serve? And people get annoyed at that service language. I love it. I think it helps. So for me, I'm like, okay, who do I serve in my business? Well, we work with HR leaders. They're the people we speak to. They're the people that we're here to support. You need to work out who that is. Now, if you're in a HR role, it'll be executive, it'll be line managers, it could be founders. You need to get clear on, okay, who do I serve and what do they care about? Answer those first 2 questions. Step 2, then I need you to think about presence. And presence is where your influence is built. And it'll look different based on your personality. So my presence, and I won't speak for you, Matt, but it'd be nice to see what you would say about you. My presence is I am real, I am sometimes cheeky, and I think I like to keep things simple. That's kind of like how I show up. If you were to describe your presence, like if someone was to say, okay, this is Matt's vibe, this is how he shows up, what is that for you?
Yeah, I mean, the way you described it really resonated, but I think for me, it's like, I like to make things really digestible and easy to understand. There definitely has to be that sense of humor, so the cheekiness resonates. And what else? I mean, I think just like just being credible, like, being seen to sort of know what I'm talking about and having a deep sort of intimacy with the problem, I think.
Yeah, and I would say you're smart without being condescending. Like, how some people are really, really smart, but sometimes they can make things overly complex or they can feel condescending. The way you communicate is you keep things simple. There is a level of intelligence in what you put out there into the world, but there is still that humility that comes with it. And I think that becomes really relatable. And that's probably another word I would use for you if I was to describe your presence, is relatable. And so if I think about that, okay, for your listeners, they need to think about, okay, what is, like, when I think about my presence, how do I want to be? Like, how do I want to show up? The other thing I want you to add into this bucket of presence is, how can I actively listen? So having a good presence in let's say a meeting, is being a great active listener, asking really good questions and being able to play back to someone the problem you've heard or what you've understood from them. People who have great presence, they do those things. And then the last one is problems. And you've already alluded to this, deeply understanding the problem. And gosh, there's so many problems when it comes to compensation and pay. And so
I'm going to say people. I was like, there's a lot in compensation.
Yeah, but I was thinking about your industry and I'm like, there's so many problems there. Like complex, messy problems, anomalies everywhere. But if we think about this, so we go, okay, who do I serve? People. Who are they? What are they interested in? What do they care about? What is my presence when I show up to meetings? How do I make sure I listen, I deeply understand, I ask curious questions, and also at the same time show up as me, whoever you are, like your unique personality, that's your presence. And the last one is problems. What is the problem that you solve that is specific to you? Because like, you have found your niche, your superpower, Matt, which is compensation and helping startups figure that whole messy landscape out. You know deeply that problem, you've been able to solve it. Most of us can have a go-to problem that we solve where we're like, oh, Jack is that person for that specific thing. Be it talent acquisition, be it whatever kind of range of things that you want to be known for. Become really good at solving problems, and that builds your influence. So don't just think about my technical credibility. Think about, okay, who are the people that I serve? What is the presence I want to show up with? And how do I get really good at solving specific problems? And if you can do that, you will build your influence. And I would love to see more people in culture pros being more influential in organizations.
Yeah. So I see so many incredible people, like you said, and I think it's it's a hard gig, and I think people know it. And so I think they should absolutely be displaying the credibility that they absolutely already have. So that's an amazing framework. And I am absolutely going to write down the 1,000 questions that I have going through my head for our part 2. This can be a nice little tease for what will inevitably be another conversation.
And I think lots of our listeners on This Is Work will really want to dig into pay. Everyone always wants to talk about pay because they're like, I don't get to talk about it as much in my organization, so I need to listen to someone talking on a podcast about it where I can take lots of notes.
We can do half and half, one on building influence, one on pay, but it's all the trickiest of topics. This has been amazing. Thank you so much for your time. We're coming out to anything I didn't cover, anything that you think is like, gosh, I wish we had some, one little tip or one, space for one more thing that people need to know when it comes to leadership.
I think at the end of the day, for me, the biggest thing is that whether or not your organization is investing in leadership, you don't need to overbake it. So find little things like listening to this and going, okay, what actions can we take as a group? How do we get people together and just get conversations going about the challenges for leaders and then actions people can take? To me, that's one of the best and most practical ways to develop people's leadership skills. So I would just start there.
Doesn't have to be as hard as we make it out in our heads, does it?
No, definitely not.
Amazing. Shelley, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for jumping on the pod. This has been incredible. And we're going to have to, create the suspense for part 2.
Part 2, and it's a while away because you're going on a big overseas extended trip.
100% am, which I cannot wait for. But when I get back, I'll be ready. I'll be all like zen and we can talk about pay and then I'll be... No, I'm sure I'll still be zen
and I will be jealous. Perfect.
Amazing. Well, thank you again for joining us and have an amazing rest of your week.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks for joining us on another edition of the Foundation Series. Make sure to head over to our website to subscribe to the Foundation Series for monthly editions featuring future interviews on startup compensation. In each edition, we'll explore the different strategies, trends, and challenges faced by startups around the world. If you have a burning topic you'd like me to cover or a standout guest that you want to hear from, drop me an email so I can dive deeper into the compensation topics that matter most to you. Join me next time as we continue to uncover the strategies and practices driving success in global tech startups around the world. Thanks for listening.